The clock struck midnight at Windsor Castle when something unprecedented happened that would shake the very foundations of the British royal family. A mysterious locked wooden box, aged and weathered, appeared outside Prince Louis' bedroom door like a ghost from the past. What was inside this enigmatic container would reveal secrets that had been buried for decades, threatening to expose a truth so shocking that it could change the line of succession. When the night guard discovered the box during his routine patrol, he had no idea that his simple security check would uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the monarchy. The box bore no identification, no return address, just an ancient royal seal that hadn't been used in over 50 years. As Queen Camilla was summoned to explain its contents, her pale face and trembling hands suggested she knew exactly what dark secret had finally surfaced. This is the true story of one night that changed everything, where a child's bedroom became the center of a royal storm, and where the most guarded secrets of the crown were finally brought into the light. The autumn wind howled through the ancient corridors of Windsor Castle as Guard Captain James Morrison completed his final security round of the evening. 23 years of service to the royal family had taught him that the castle held many secrets, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would discover on this particular October night. Morrison had always been meticulous in his duties. Every door, every window, every corner of the sprawling royal residence received his careful attention during the midnight patrol. The castle felt different tonight, though he couldn't quite place why. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more profound, as if the very walls were holding their breath. As he approached the family wing where the younger royals resided, Morrison noticed something that made him freeze in his tracks. There, positioned precisely in front of Prince Louis's bedroom door, sat a wooden box that definitely hadn't been there during his previous round just 2 hours earlier. The container appeared old, very old, with intricate carvings along its sides and a heavy brass lock that gleamed despite the dim hallway lighting. Morrison's training immediately kicked in. Any unidentified object near a member of the royal family was a potential security threat. He radioed his team while carefully examining the box from a safe distance. The wood appeared to be oak, darkened with age, and the craftsmanship suggested it was quite valuable. What struck him most, however, was the royal seal pressed into the wax that secured the lock. It wasn't a contemporary seal, but rather one from a much earlier era. Within minutes, the castle's security chief arrived, followed by explosive detection specialists and forensic experts. The box was carefully scanned and examined, revealing no signs of dangerous materials. Yet something about its presence felt ominous to everyone who saw it. The seal, when examined under magnification, bore markings that hadn't been used by the royal family in over half a century. As news of the mysterious box spread through the castle's communication networks, word reached Queen Camilla in her private quarters. She had been reading in her sitting room when the call came, and those who witnessed her reaction later described a woman who appeared to age years in mere seconds. The color drained from her face as she listened to the description of the box, particularly when the security chief mentioned the ancient royal seal. "I need to see it immediately," Camilla had said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was something in her tone that suggested this wasn't merely royal curiosity, but rather a deep, personal concern that bordered on fear. The queen consort's journey through the castle corridors that night was unlike any other. Usually confident and composed, she moved with hesitant steps, as if each footfall brought her closer to a reckoning she had long dreaded. Staff members who encountered her along the way noted her unusual pallor and the way her hands seemed to tremble slightly at her sides. When Camilla finally reached the family wing, the area had been secured and cleared of all non-essential personnel. Only Guard Captain Morrison, Security Chief Williams, and 2 forensic specialists remained. The box sat on a temporary table, illuminated by portable lighting that cast eerie shadows on the surrounding walls. Camilla's reaction upon seeing the box was immediate and telling. She stopped several feet away, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Those present later reported that she stared at the container for nearly a full minute without speaking, as if she were seeing a ghost from her past. "Your Majesty," Security Chief Williams ventured carefully, "do you recognize this box?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Camilla's response, when it finally came, was barely audible. "Where exactly was it found?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Directly outside Prince Louis's bedroom door, ma'am. Positioned carefully, not dropped or thrown." The significance of this detail wasn't lost on anyone present. The placement suggested intention, purpose, as if someone had specifically chosen that location for maximum impact. But who would have access to this secure area of the castle? And more importantly, who would know the significance of placing this particular box outside that particular door? Camilla circled the table slowly, examining the box from different angles. Her expertise in antiques and historical artifacts was well known, and her careful study of the container suggested she was identifying specific details that others might miss. The intricate carvings, the type of brass used in the lock, the exact style of the royal seal, all seemed to tell her a story that she was reluctant to share. "Has anyone attempted to open it?" she asked, though she seemed to already know this would be impossible without the proper key or significant force that might damage whatever was inside. "No, ma'am. We were waiting for your arrival and further instructions." The weight of decision fell heavily on Camilla's shoulders. Opening the box might reveal secrets she had spent decades keeping buried. Leaving it unopened, however, meant living with the uncertainty and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, knew enough about the past to threaten the carefully constructed present. As the small group stood in the hallway, the castle's ancient heating system created settling sounds that seemed amplified in the tension-filled silence. Each creak and groan of the old building felt like a reminder of all the secrets these walls had witnessed over the centuries. Morrison, despite his years of experience with royal protocol, found himself fascinated by the unfolding drama. He had seen the royal family handle various crises with grace and composure, but this felt different. This felt deeply personal and potentially explosive. The box itself seemed to emanate an almost magnetic presence. Everyone in the hallway felt drawn to look at it, yet none dared approach too closely without permission. Its very existence raised countless questions. Who had crafted it? When had it been made? What secrets did it contain? And perhaps most importantly, who had placed it here tonight, and why? Camilla's internal struggle was evident to all observers. Years of royal training had taught her to maintain composure under pressure, but this situation tested those skills to their limits. She knew that whatever decision she made in the next few minutes could have consequences that reached far beyond this midnight encounter. The lighting in the hallway created an almost theatrical atmosphere, with the mysterious box serving as the central prop in a drama that none of the participants fully understood yet. The shadows cast by the portable lights danced on the walls, creating an ever-changing backdrop to this unprecedented scene. As minutes ticked by, the tension continued to build. Staff members throughout the castle went about their duties, unaware that in one quiet hallway, a discovery was being made that could potentially alter the course of royal history. The normal sounds of the night shift cleaning crew, the distant closing of doors, the faint hum of security equipment, all continued as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet for those present in the hallway, time seemed suspended. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone, but none more so than Camilla herself. She stood before the box like a defendant before a judge, knowing that the truth inside could either vindicate her or destroy everything she had worked to build. The ancient royal seal seemed to glow under the artificial lighting, its significance growing more ominous with each passing moment. Whoever had access to that seal, whoever knew how to use it properly, possessed knowledge that reached deep into the royal family's most closely guarded secrets. Morrison continued to observe every detail, his training as a security professional combining with natural human curiosity about the unfolding mystery. He noticed how Camilla's breathing pattern had changed, how her usually steady hands showed the slightest tremor. how her eyes seemed to study not just the box but also each person present, as if calculating who could be trusted with whatever truth was about to emerge. The castle's ancient stones had witnessed countless dramas over the centuries, from medieval conspiracies to modern royal scandals. Yet this midnight discovery felt different, more intimate, and potentially more devastating than public controversies. This felt like the kind of secret that families bury so deeply they almost forget its existence, until one day it surfaces unexpectedly, demanding acknowledgement and resolution. As the small group continued their vigil around the mysterious box, none could anticipate that this was only the beginning of a revelation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the royal family's carefully maintained image and the true nature of the bonds that held them together. The decision to open the box came after nearly an hour of careful deliberation. Camilla had requested privacy to make several phone calls, speaking in hushed tones to unknown parties, while the security team maintained their watchful positions. When she returned, her demeanor had shifted from apprehensive to grimly determined. "We need to open it," she announced, though her voice carried none of the confidence typically associated with royal pronouncements. "But I want it documented completely. Every detail, every item, everything must be recorded." Security Chief Williams nodded and immediately arranged for additional forensic photography equipment. The process of opening the box would need to be methodical and thorough, both for security reasons and because everyone present sensed they were witnessing something historically significant. A specialist locksmith was summoned from London, arriving at the castle just after 2 a.m. Marcus Chen had worked with historical locks before, but the royal seal and the obvious age of the mechanism presented unique challenges. As he examined the lock under magnification, his expertise revealed troubling details. "This lock hasn't been opened in decades," Chen observed, his voice carrying the weight of professional certainty. "The wax seal is intact and original, but more importantly, there are microscopic scratches around the keyhole that suggest someone tried to force it open years ago and failed. Someone had possessed this box for years, perhaps decades, but hadn't been able to access its contents. The fact that it had now appeared at the castle suggested either the original owner had finally found a way to open it, or someone else had acquired both the box and the means to unlock its secrets." As Chen worked on the delicate mechanism, Camilla paced the hallway with uncharacteristic restlessness. Her usual composed manner had given way to visible anxiety, and she frequently glanced toward Prince Louis's bedroom door as if the proximity of the box to the young prince's quarters held special significance. But Morrison noticed how the queen consort's attention kept returning to specific details of the box's construction. She seemed to recognize not just the royal seal but other elements as well. The pattern of the wood grain, the style of the brass fittings, even the wear marks on the corners all appeared familiar to her in ways that went beyond academic knowledge of historical artifacts. "Your Majesty," Morrison ventured carefully, "if I may ask, do you have any theories about who might have placed this here?" Camilla's pause before answering spoke volumes. "There are very few people who would have access to this level of the castle," she replied, though her words seemed chosen more to deflect than to inform, and even fewer who would understand the significance of this particular seal. Each tiny movement was photographed and documented, creating a permanent record of the opening process. The tension in the hallway grew with each passing minute, as everyone present understood they were approaching a revelation that could change everything. When the lock finally yielded with a soft click that seemed to echo through the corridor, the silence that followed was profound. Chen stepped back, his job completed, leaving the actual opening to others. All eyes turned to Camilla, whose face had gone completely pale. "Would you like us to proceed, ma'am?" Williams asked, though everyone present could see the internal struggle playing out across the queen consort's features. With trembling hands, Camilla approached the box. The lid, no longer secured by the ancient lock, lifted easily on well-maintained hinges. The contents, revealed under the harsh light of the forensic equipment, drew gasps from everyone present. The box contained a collection of items that seemed to span several decades. At the top lay a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper yellowed with age, but the handwriting still clearly visible. Beneath the letters were several photographs, their edges worn from handling, showing people and places that were recognizable yet somehow different from their current forms. But it was the small, leather-bound journal at the bottom of the box that caused Camilla's knees to buckle slightly. Morrison stepped forward instinctively, ready to steady her if necessary, but she waved him away with a gesture that mixed royal authority with personal desperation. The photographs, when examined more closely, revealed scenes that should have been impossible. They showed Camilla, decades younger, in locations and situations that contradicted the official royal timeline. In one image, she stood beside a man whose face was partially obscured, but whose posture and build were unmistakably familiar. In another, she held a small child whose features bore a striking resemblance to someone everyone in the room knew well. The letters, written in Camilla's unmistakable handwriting, contained passages that would have been shocking under any circumstances. But given their discovery outside Prince Louis's bedroom, their implications became even more profound. References to "our secret," "the truth he must never know," and "protecting the future" appeared throughout the correspondence. Williams, despite his years of handling sensitive royal matters, found himself struggling to process what he was seeing. The photographs and letters suggested a hidden history that ran parallel to the well-documented public narrative of the royal family, but it was the journal that promised to contain the most damaging revelations. Camilla reached for the journal with hands that shook visibly. As she opened it to the first page, her face went through a series of expressions that ranged from sorrow to fear to something approaching relief. The opening entry was dated nearly 25 years earlier, and the handwriting, though younger and more hurried than her current script, was undeniably hers. "I cannot let this continue," she read silently, her lips moving slightly as she absorbed words she had written decades ago. "The deception has gone too far, and innocent people are being hurt. But the alternative is unthinkable. If the truth comes out now, it will destroy not just us, but the institution itself." Morrison watched as Camilla flipped through several pages, her expression growing more troubled with each entry. The journal appeared to document a series of events and decisions that had shaped the current royal landscape in ways that the public could never have imagined. The forensic photographer continued his work, carefully documenting each item as it was examined. The flash of his camera created a stroboscopic effect in the hallway, adding an almost surreal quality to the already extraordinary scene. Each photograph would become part of an official record that could potentially be reviewed by historians, lawyers, and government officials in the years to come. As Camilla continued reading, tears began to form in her eyes. The journal entries revealed a woman torn between love, duty, and an impossible situation that had no clear resolution. References to Charles's trust, the children's future, and maintaining the facade painted a picture of someone trapped by circumstances largely beyond her control. One particular entry, dated just months before Prince Louis's birth, contained revelations that caused Camilla to close the journal abruptly. She stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of past decisions and their present consequences written clearly across her features. "Ma'am," William said gently, "perhaps we should continue this examination in a more private setting?" Camilla nodded, but her attention remained fixed on the journal in her hands. "These items," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "they represent choices made in desperation during very difficult times. Choices that seemed right then but that cast shadows over everything that followed." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. Everyone present understood they had stumbled upon something that went far beyond a simple security incident. This was a family secret of the highest order, one that could potentially alter public understanding of recent royal history. Morrison found himself wondering who had compiled these items and why they had chosen this moment to reveal them. The timing seemed deliberate, calculated to maximize impact and minimize the royal family's ability to control the narrative. Someone with intimate knowledge of palace security and access to the family wing had orchestrated this revelation with precision. The leather journal contained dozens of entries spanning several years. Each page revealed another layer of complexity to a situation that had clearly caused Camilla enormous personal anguish. Her younger self had documented meetings, conversations, and decisions that painted a picture of a royal family struggling with challenges far more complex than the public ever realized. As the night wore on, it became clear that opening the box had been only the beginning. The real challenge would be determining what to do with the explosive information it contained, and more importantly, discovering who had placed it outside Prince Louis's door, and what they hoped to accomplish by revealing these long-buried secrets. The castle's ancient walls seemed to press closer around the small group as they grappled with revelations that could reshape the monarchy's future. In the distance, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, but for those gathered around the mysterious box and its contents, the night was far from over. Dawn was breaking over Windsor Castle when the full scope of the revelations began to emerge. Camilla had insisted on moving the examination to her private study, a room where centuries of royal secrets had been discussed and decided. The mysterious box now sat on her mahogany desk, its contents spread out like pieces of a puzzle that threatened to reconstruct the entire narrative of recent royal history. The journal entries, when read in sequence, revealed a story that was both heartbreaking and potentially devastating. They documented Camilla's internal struggle during a period when the royal family was facing unprecedented challenges, and when personal relationships had become entangled with matters of state in ways that defied easy resolution. Security Chief Williams had been joined by Sir Michael Harrison, the Queen's private secretary, and Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, a historical document expert who had been summoned despite the early hour. The presence of these additional witnesses underscored the gravity of the situation, as did the decision to involve legal counsel who were standing by via secure communication channels. The handwriting analysis confirms what we already suspected, Thornton reported after examining several of the letters. These documents are authentic, written by Her Majesty during the time periods indicated by the dates. The paper, ink, and aging patterns are all consistent with genuine historical artifacts. This confirmation meant that the revelations contained within the documents could not be dismissed as elaborate forgeries or malicious fabrications. Whatever secrets the box contained represented real events, real decisions, and real consequences that had shaped the royal family's trajectory. Camilla sat behind her desk, the journal open before her, reading passages that she had written during what was clearly one of the most difficult periods of her life. Her younger self had poured her heart onto these pages, documenting struggles that she had never shared with anyone else. "There are certain entries," she said quietly, "that concern events and decisions that were never meant to become public knowledge. Not because they were illegal or improper, but because they involved personal matters that could be misunderstood if taken out of context." One particularly revealing entry, dated 18 months before Prince Louis's birth, described a meeting that had taken place in secret, away from the palace and away from the watchful eyes of both the media and the royal staff. The meeting had involved discussions about the future of the monarchy, the challenges facing younger members of the royal family, and the difficult balance between personal happiness and public duty. The photographs in the box provided visual context for some of these entries. Several showed Camilla in what appeared to be private moments with family members, but the dates and locations raised questions about the official timeline of events that had been presented to the public. Other photographs showed documents and conversations that suggested a level of coordination and planning that went far beyond what had been publicly acknowledged. Morrison, despite his training in maintaining professional discretion, found himself fascinated by the glimpses into royal decision-making that were unfolding before him. The journal entries revealed a woman who was acutely aware of her position's responsibilities while also struggling with deeply personal concerns about the people she loved. One letter, written to an unnamed recipient, contained passages that were particularly revealing. "The situation has become impossible to maintain. Everyone is suffering under the weight of expectations that cannot be met and secrets that cannot be revealed. We need to find a solution that protects the institution while also protecting the individuals who have sacrificed so much. Sir Michael Harrison, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, examined each document with the careful attention of someone who understood their potential implications. His experience with royal protocol and constitutional law made him uniquely qualified to assess the significance of what had been discovered. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "some of these documents reference decisions that were made during constitutionally sensitive periods. While the content appears to be personal in nature, the timing and the people involved could raise questions about proper procedures being followed." This observation highlighted one of the most troubling aspects of the discovery. The documents didn't just reveal personal struggles. They potentially called into question the official processes and timelines that had been presented to both Parliament and the public during crucial periods in recent royal history. The leather journal contained detailed accounts of conversations with other family members, including discussions about the challenges facing younger royals as they navigated the complex demands of modern monarchy. These accounts revealed a level of concern and strategic thinking that had never been publicly acknowledged. Dr. Thornton continued her analysis of the physical documents, using specialized equipment to examine the papers under different types of light and magnification. Her expertise was crucial in establishing not just the authenticity of the documents, but also their chain of custody and the conditions under which they had been stored. "The preservation is remarkable," she noted. "These documents have been kept in controlled conditions, protected from light and moisture. This suggests they were stored by someone who understood their historical value and wanted to ensure they remained intact for future examination." This observation raised additional questions about who had possessed these documents and why they had chosen this moment to reveal them. The level of care taken in their preservation suggested a long-term plan rather than a spontaneous decision to expose royal secrets. As the morning progressed, additional details emerged from the documents that painted an increasingly complex picture. References to the plan, necessary deceptions, and protecting the future appeared throughout the correspondence, suggesting a coordinated effort to manage a situation that threatened the stability of the monarchy itself. Camilla's reading of her own words from decades past was clearly causing her significant emotional distress. Several times she paused to compose herself, the weight of past decisions and their current implications evident in her expression. The journal entries revealed a woman who had been forced to make impossible choices while carrying the burden of knowledge that could not be shared. One entry, written during a particularly difficult period, contained a passage that seemed especially relevant to the current situation. "I sometimes wonder if the truth will ever emerge, and what the consequences will be when it does. We have built so much on foundations that are more fragile than anyone realizes. Perhaps one day someone will have the courage to reveal what really happened and the wisdom to understand why we made the choices we did." The prophetic nature of these words was not lost on anyone present. It seemed as though Camilla's younger self had anticipated this moment, when the carefully maintained facade would finally crack and the truth would demand acknowledgement. Sir Michael Harrison was particularly concerned about the constitutional implications of some of the revelations. Several entries referenced discussions with senior government officials about matters that should have been handled through official channels. The informal nature of these communications raised questions about whether proper protocols had been followed during sensitive political periods. "We need to consider the possibility," he said quietly, "that some of these revelations could require official governmental review. Depending on the nature of the decisions documented here, there might be constitutional questions that need to be addressed." The gravity of this observation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. What had begun as a security incident was rapidly evolving into something that could potentially require involvement from the highest levels of government. The royal family's ability to manage this crisis internally was becoming increasingly questionable. Morrison observed how the dynamics in the room had shifted as more details emerged from the documents. What had started as a group united in solving a mystery was becoming a collection of individuals grappling with the personal and professional implications of explosive revelations. Each person present was calculating the potential consequences for their own positions and responsibilities. The photographs in the box included several that showed meetings and events that had never been officially documented. These images provided visual evidence of coordination and planning that suggested the royal family had been dealing with challenges far more complex than the public had ever realized. As the examination continued, it became increasingly clear that the mysterious box and its contents represented only the beginning of a much larger revelation. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to compile this evidence and ensure its eventual discovery. The precision with which it had been placed outside Prince Louis's bedroom suggested a message that went beyond mere exposure of past secrets. The morning sun now streamed through the study windows, illuminating a scene that seemed to belong more to a political thriller than to the normally serene environment of royal administration. The contrast between the peaceful castle grounds visible outside and the explosive revelations being examined inside captured the surreal nature of the unfolding crisis. Camilla closed the journal and looked around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated their careers to protecting and serving the royal family. The weight of their shared knowledge and the responsibility for deciding what to do next rested heavily on everyone present. The secrets that had been carefully guarded for decades were now exposed, demanding decisions that could reshape the monarchy's future. By mid-morning, the investigation had expanded beyond the initial discovery team. King Charles had been briefed on the situation and had arrived at Windsor Castle with his own advisors, creating a crisis management team that included some of the most senior figures in both the royal household and the British government. The atmosphere in Camilla's study had become increasingly tense as the full implications of the documents continued to unfold. The most shocking revelation came from a series of letters dated around the time of Prince Louis's birth. These documents suggested that decisions made during that period had been influenced by information and considerations that had never been publicly disclosed. The letters referenced ensuring the right outcome, protecting bloodlines, and maintaining constitutional stability in ways that raised profound questions about the transparency of royal succession planning. Dr. Margaret Foster, a constitutional expert who had been hastily summoned from Oxford, examined the documents with growing concern. Her expertise in royal law and succession protocols made her uniquely qualified to assess the legal implications of what had been discovered. Some of these documents, she explained to the assembled group, appear to reference decision-making processes that should have been formally documented and subject to governmental oversight. If the timeline and events described here are accurate, there may have been deviations from established constitutional procedures. This assessment sent shockwaves through the room. The British constitutional system depended on strict adherence to established protocols, particularly regarding matters of succession and royal lineage. Any suggestion that proper procedures had been circumvented could potentially invalidate decisions that had shaped the current royal structure. King Charles, who had been reading through selected documents with increasing alarm, looked older than his years as he processed the implications. The journal entries revealed aspects of family dynamics and decision-making that painted a picture of a monarchy under far greater stress than anyone outside the inner circle had realized. "These are personal writings," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of both authority and uncertainty. "They represent thoughts and concerns during an extraordinarily difficult period. We must be careful not to read more into them than was actually intended." However, even as Charles attempted to minimize the significance of the revelations, it was clear that some of the documented decisions and conversations had gone far beyond personal reflection. Several entries described meetings with senior officials, legal consultations, and strategic planning sessions that suggested a coordinated effort to manage information and influence outcomes in ways that had never been publicly acknowledged. Sir Michael Harrison had been in contact with the cabinet secretary throughout the morning, providing updates on the emerging situation. The involvement of government officials at this level indicated that the discovery was being treated as a potential constitutional crisis, rather than a simple family matter. Morrison, despite his lower rank in the hierarchy of those present, continued to serve as a crucial witness to the unfolding drama. His detailed observations and professional memory would likely be essential if official investigations were eventually required. He noted how the dynamics between family members and their advisors shifted as more damaging information emerged from the documents. One particularly troubling letter, addressed to a legal advisor whose identity was carefully concealed within the text, outlined contingency plans for managing various scenarios related to royal succession. The letter suggested that multiple potential outcomes had been considered and that preparations had been made to influence public perception and official processes depending on how events unfolded. This level of planning and coordination, Dr. Foster observed, suggests that the royal family was operating under information or constraints that were never disclosed to the appropriate governmental authorities. Depending on the specific nature of these constraints, there could be serious constitutional implications. The photographs in the box continued to yield disturbing revelations as they were examined more closely. Several showed documents being signed and meetings taking place that had no corresponding entries in official royal records. The informal nature of these gatherings, combined with their obvious importance, suggested a parallel decision-making structure that had operated outside normal channels. Camilla's distress had become increasingly evident as the morning progressed. The journal entries were forcing her to relive decisions that had clearly caused her enormous personal anguish, while also exposing those decisions to scrutiny from people whose judgment could determine her future role within the royal family. "Every choice documented in these pages," she said during a brief break in the examination, "was made with the best interests of the institution and the people we serve. The circumstances we faced then were unprecedented, and the solutions we found were the best available options at the time." Her words, while heartfelt, did little to diminish the growing concern among those present about the potential legal and constitutional ramifications of what had been revealed. The gap between personal justification and institutional accountability was becoming increasingly apparent. Dr. Thornton's continued analysis of the documents had revealed additional disturbing details about their provenance. Several of the papers showed signs of having been copied or reproduced, suggesting that the original documents might still exist elsewhere. This possibility raised the terrifying prospect that whoever had compiled this collection might possess additional evidence that had not yet been revealed. The paper analysis indicates that some of these documents were photocopied decades ago, she reported. This suggests that someone has been maintaining a comprehensive record of these events for a very long time, possibly with the intention of eventual disclosure. This revelation transformed the situation from a crisis of disclosure to a potential blackmail scenario. If someone had been collecting and preserving evidence of royal decision-making irregularities for decades, their current revelation of this information might be only the beginning of a larger campaign of exposure. The timing of the discovery also seemed increasingly significant. The placement of the box outside Prince Louis's bedroom on this particular night suggested knowledge of royal schedules and movements that indicated an insider's involvement. Someone with intimate access to palace operations and detailed knowledge of security procedures had orchestrated this revelation with precision. Sir Michael Harrison's communications with government officials had become increasingly frequent and urgent as the morning progressed. The potential constitutional implications of the documents required high-level political consultation, and decisions were being made at the highest levels of government about how to respond to the emerging crisis. "We're moving beyond family management of this situation," he informed the group. "The Prime Minister's office has been briefed, and there will likely be formal governmental involvement in determining next steps." This announcement marked a crucial turning point in the crisis. What had begun as a security incident had evolved into a constitutional matter requiring coordination between the royal household and the elected government. The royal family's traditional autonomy in managing their internal affairs was being superseded by broader institutional concerns. The leather journal contained several entries that seemed to anticipate this very scenario. Camilla's younger self had written about the possibility that their carefully managed situation might eventually unravel, and the consequences that would follow. We are walking on ice so thin that any sudden movement could send us all plunging into waters too deep to survive, read one particularly prescient entry. Yet we continue because the alternative, abandoning our responsibilities and admitting our failures, would be even more devastating to those who depend on us. As the day progressed, it became clear that the mysterious box had contained only a sample of potentially damaging information. References in the documents to additional materials, backup copies, and supporting evidence suggested that whoever had orchestrated this revelation possessed far more extensive documentation than had yet been disclosed. The investigation team faced the uncomfortable realization that they were dealing with someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. The careful preservation of documents, the strategic timing of their release, and the symbolic placement outside Prince Louis's bedroom all indicated a level of planning and patience that suggested a deeply personal motivation for revenge or justice. King Charles made the decision to expand the crisis management team to include additional legal and constitutional experts, recognizing that the family's ability to contain and manage the situation internally had been compromised by the scope and nature of the revelations. As afternoon approached, the team prepared for what they now understood would be a prolonged crisis, with implications that could extend far beyond the royal family itself. The mysterious box had proven to be only the key that unlocked a much larger vault of secrets, and the person who had provided that key clearly intended for all of those secrets to eventually see the light of day. The afternoon brought an unexpected development that changed everything. A second package arrived at Windsor Castle, this time delivered through official channels by a courier service. The package was addressed directly to Guard Captain Morrison, the man who had discovered the original box, and contained a detailed letter that finally revealed the identity and motivations of the person behind the revelations. The letter was signed by Margaret Whitmore, a former private secretary to the royal family, who had served during the critical period documented in the journal entries. Whitmore had been presumed deceased following a car accident 5 years earlier, but the letter revealed that she had survived and had been living in quiet retirement, watching the consequences of decisions she had witnessed decades earlier. "I have carried these secrets for 25 years," the letter began, "watching as lies became official truth and as innocent people suffered for decisions made in desperation and fear. The time has come for accountability. Not because I seek revenge, but because the truth deserves to see light, and because Prince Louis deserves to know the real circumstances of his place in the royal succession." Morrison read the letter aloud to the assembled crisis team, his voice steady despite the extraordinary nature of its contents. Whitmore's account provided context and explanation for many of the cryptic references in Camilla's journal, painting a picture of a royal family facing challenges that threatened the very foundation of the modern monarchy. According to Whitmore's detailed account, the period around Prince Louis's birth had been marked by a crisis that had never been publicly acknowledged. Medical complications, genetic concerns, and questions about succession protocols had combined to create a situation that required unprecedented decision-making by both the royal family and senior government officials. "The documents in the box represent only a fraction of the records I have maintained," Whitmore's letter continued. "I have spent decades documenting not just the decisions that were made, but the alternatives that were rejected, the people who were silenced, and the truths that were buried to protect an institution that had forgotten its obligation to serve truth rather than convenience." The letter revealed that Whitmore had been present during many of the meetings and conversations referenced in Camilla's journal. Her role as private secretary had given her access to information and decision-making processes that few others had witnessed, and her meticulous record-keeping had preserved evidence of events that were never meant to be documented. King Charles read through Whitmore's account with growing recognition and concern. Her descriptions of meetings, conversations, and decisions aligned disturbingly well with his own recollections of that turbulent period. The accuracy of her observations made it impossible to dismiss her claims as the fantasies of a disgruntled former employee. "She was there," he acknowledged quietly. "Margaret witnessed things that we had hoped would remain private, and her perspective on those events is one that we cannot simply ignore or contradict." Dr. Foster examined Whitmore's letter with particular attention to its legal implications. The former secretary claimed to have evidence of procedural irregularities, undisclosed medical information, and coordination between royal and governmental officials that had bypassed normal constitutional channels. If Ms. Whitmore's claims are substantiated by the evidence she claims to possess, Dr. Foster warned, we could be facing challenges to the legitimacy of decisions that have shaped the current line of succession. The constitutional implications could be extraordinarily serious. The letter also revealed Whitmore's motivation for choosing this particular moment and method for her revelations. She had been diagnosed with a terminal illness 6 months earlier and had decided that she could not take these secrets to her grave. Her placement of the box outside Prince Louis's bedroom had been intended as a symbolic gesture, highlighting the young prince's central role in the hidden history she was revealing. Prince Louis represents both the culmination of the decisions we made and the victim of their consequences, Whitmore had written. He deserves to inherit a monarchy built on truth rather than one sustained by carefully maintained deceptions. This revelation is my gift to him, though I recognize it may initially feel more like a burden. Sir Michael Harrison was already coordinating with legal teams and constitutional experts to assess the potential challenges that might arise if Whitmore's full evidence collection was made public. The scope of her documentation, as described in the letter, suggested revelations that could affect not just the royal family, but also senior government officials who had been involved in the decision-making process. The letter included detailed instructions for accessing additional evidence that Whitmore had secured in multiple locations. She had clearly anticipated that her initial revelation might be suppressed or discredited, and had taken steps to ensure that the full truth would eventually emerge, regardless of the royal family's response to her initial disclosure. I have provided copies of all relevant documents to several trusted individuals, with instructions for their release if anything happens to me or if attempts are made to suppress this information. Her letter concluded, the truth is larger than any one person's desire to protect it, and it will find a way to emerge regardless of the obstacles placed in its path. Morrison found himself in the unprecedented position of being the primary conduit between Whitmore and the royal family. Her decision to address the letter to him personally suggested that she viewed him as a trustworthy intermediary who would ensure that her message reached its intended audience without being filtered or suppressed by royal handlers. The afternoon session became increasingly focused on damage control and crisis management as the full scope of Whitmore's evidence collection became apparent. Her records apparently included not just written documentation, but also audio recordings, photographs, and copies of official documents that had been thought to be securely controlled. Camilla's reaction to learning about Whitmore's survival and her decades-long documentation project was complex and deeply emotional. The knowledge that someone had been watching and recording their family's most private struggles was devastating, but there was also a sense of relief that the burden of maintaining these secrets was finally being lifted from her shoulders. Margaret always understood the situation better than anyone else, Camilla reflected. During a break in the crisis discussions, she saw how the pressures and impossible choices were affecting everyone involved. Perhaps she is right that the time has come to stop protecting institutions at the expense of the people who serve them. As evening approached, the crisis team faced the reality that they were dealing with a carefully orchestrated revelation that had been planned and prepared for years. Whitmore's systematic approach and her preparation of backup plans suggested that any attempt to suppress or manage the information would likely be unsuccessful and could potentially make the eventual revelation even more damaging. Dr. Thornton's analysis of the additional materials referenced in Whitmore's letter suggested that the former secretary had maintained professional quality documentation that would be difficult to challenge or discredit. Her background and expertise would give her credibility that could not be easily undermined by character assassination or procedural challenges. The decision was made to establish direct communication with Whitmore to understand the full scope of her evidence and to explore possibilities for managing the revelation in a way that would minimize damage to both the royal family and the constitutional system they represented. King Charles authorized Sir Michael Harrison to reach out to Whitmore through the contact information provided in her letter, beginning a negotiation process that would determine whether the emerging crisis could be managed through controlled disclosure or whether it would explode into a full constitutional emergency. As night fell over Windsor Castle, the same corridors where Guard Captain Morrison had made his fateful discovery less than 24 hours earlier now buzzed with activity as teams of lawyers, constitutional experts, and crisis management specialists worked to address revelations that threatened to reshape British constitutional history. The mysterious box that had started it all sat empty on Camilla's desk, its secrets finally revealed, but its consequences still unfolding. Margaret Whitmore's decision to break decades of silence had set in motion a series of events that would test the resilience of both the royal family and the constitutional system they represented. The young Prince Louis, sleeping peacefully in his bedroom down the hall, remained unaware that he had become the center of a historical revelation that would likely define his future role in a monarchy that was about to face its greatest test of transparency and accountability in modern times. The truth, as Whitmore had promised, was finally demanding its day in the light, and no amount of royal protocol or institutional protection could prevent its emergence. "Explain this!" Guard stops Camilla after a mysterious locked box is discovered outside Louis's bedroom at midnight.